Hello, and welcome back to In the Harbor, the podcast where sports, leisure, and finance meet. I'm your host, Jason Johns. Today I'll be joined by Mackie Daniel and Sean Richland here in studio next to me for a special conversation with Chandler Withington, artist of this piece back here behind me, a former golf pro and all-around great guy. We're excited to have him. Sean, tell us a little bit about what's in store for our listeners.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about Archive 22, the amazing company that he has built, designing these golf memorabilia, the history of the game, going through everything, and now he's dovetailed into the NHL. We'll get a little story and the background into how he got into the NHL, how he got into golf, and a little bit of his history as a pro as well.
You know, I think, guys, one of the things that is really awesome is there's a lot of ways to stay involved in the game of golf, whether it's as a caddy, as a pro, an assistant pro, 2 jobs, 3 jobs actually that Chandler did. Now a historian of the game, using his artistic talent as a way to captivate people, bring people together, stir up fond memories. Where was I when I was watching the 99 U.S. Open? All his work, which can be found at his site, Archive 22. Really, really cool pieces that we encourage everyone to check out.
He also has an awesome podcast, too, called The Inward Nine, which brings on former pros, is helpful for new pros in the golf business that are going to clubs to learn from some of the experts. He's had, Bob Ford on, the legend of the game, Gavin Gee at Oakmont now. So there's a lot of great information that he has out there, and we were so fortunate to have him come join us today, Jason. I don't know what you think.
Absolutely. I mean, I was listening to the Inward Nine as we prepped for this podcast episode, and I was practicing a few golf tricks he and Bob Ford talked about to get my swing under control. It didn't work, but
the board one, right?
Yeah, the board one, which I couldn't even visualize where we set the board up, but Sean fortunately walked me through it. It didn't help.
Yeah, don't hit the board. Inside swing, Mackie. Inside.
Can't be coming over the top like I have for 19 years, as long as I've been swinging a golf club.
But these pieces that he puts together are so great for a financial advisor or someone to have in their office. So when you have a customer come in or a client come in, it's a great conversation piece. And there's so much information and trivia that are on these pieces, which we will be talking about quite a bit over the next week.
Absolutely. I think one thing that's really fascinating about being a golf pro, and Chandler leads into it a little bit in our conversation, is really the human aspect. So it's not dissimilar to what you're doing as a financial advisor, what we're doing in talking to financial advisors. It's really the human aspect of the business. And you think of how many egos you have to manage and how many just different personalities you have to manage as a golf pro.
Oh, it's endless. And Mackie, you can speak to it, being a caddy for so long and an Evans Scholar. You've seen all the personalities, that's for sure, out there in your life.
Yeah, you get all walks of life. And I think that's one of the coolest parts of both businesses, both golf and finance. Everyone has a story. We're lucky enough to hear Chandler's today, but you learn to navigate people and conversations, carrying the bag starting at 13 years old. You got to learn to talk, or in a lot of cases, not talk like an adult. Find your spots, open-ended questions. There's a real human aspect that golf teaches people. And, I certainly encourage everyone, if you have kids, get them involved in the game, whether it's junior programs, a caddy program. We have a ton of really healthy caddy programs here in Metro Detroit. Great way to get involved. And, we touched on the Evans Scholarship a bit too. Chandler had the chance to really see that firsthand when he took over as head pro at Hazeltine, a Midwest club in Minnesota that has great history with the Western Golf Association and the Evans Scholars. It's always a program that's going to be near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, we may have a new idea for the WGA too if you tune in and listen.
Yeah, you got to listen to the whole thing though before you get to that tidbit.
We're just fast forward to the end.
But we're excited for the conversation. I think we'll let you listen from here.
Last thing, we get a little bit of a U.S. Open preview.
Oh, yeah.
It is U.S. Open week, so we thought that was timely.
Oakmont, here it comes. Week of the U.S. Open. Can't wait to sit down on my couch. Nothing like Father's Day on Sunday watching the final group come in.
I completely agree, and I think it reminds me of what Chandler and Bob Ford talked about on his podcast, The Inward Nine, the 1983 U.S. Open at Oakmont. Bob was playing in it.
It's amazing.
And then running the merchandising tent, which I think is fascinating.
It is. I don't even know how he did it. The guy's incredible.
Sean, you got a heck of a weekend coming up. Birthday Saturday, watching the U.S. Open. Father's Day Sunday, watching the U.S. Open.
To end the Stanley Cup. So I got pretty much the trifecta for me. Or I guess it would be four, quadfecta.
That'll do.
All right, well, we hope you enjoy this conversation and tune in for our insights on the U.S. Open and who we think is looking good to win it. Thank you. Welcome in, Chandler. We're excited to have you joining us on In the Harbor podcast. I think to start out, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your career arc coming from Basking Ridge, New Jersey, which I think there's actually a country club in Basking Ridge that I've been to with a bar on the 18th green that I've sat at many a time. But
yeah, good memory. Yeah, you're talking about my high school home course. Guys, thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you. Yeah, Basking Ridge is where I grew up, which is actually right in the shadow of Far Hills in the USGA, but I didn't even know it. I wasn't anybody that played golf. I didn't know anybody that played golf. I didn't have any friends that played golf. I didn't watch golf. You know, that wasn't a word thrown around in our house. The only guy that I knew that played golf, I'm kind of looking at that fire helmet over your left shoulder there, Jason, was our retired fire chief who lived next door to me. Guy who smoked a pipe in his driveway. Like, that was the only guy I knew who played golf. So my impression of golf was like, you know, this is the sport you play right before you die. But that all changed for me in '92. I went down to Harbortown in South Carolina on our family spring break, and we were actually staying on Harbortown the week of the MCI Heritage. This was the week after the Masters, and all my cousins from Atlanta were the golf side of the family, and they were trying to get me to go out and watch golf with them. And I was a hockey and baseball guy growing up, and I was kind of like, I have no interest in going to watch golf, but there's really nothing else going on. So they got me out to the par 5 tee at Harbortown, and you watch these guys hit drivers. And, you know, for all you guys on this show, you remember the first time you see live golf, it just sucks you in. And that was the hook for me. And I watched a younger player, you know, younger back then wasn't, you know, these 21-year-olds like when Jordan Spieth came out. It was like 27, was kind of young on tour then. And he hit a persimmon, you know, a wooden driver, like out of sight. And I thought it was the coolest thing that I'd ever seen. We followed him around the rest of the week. He ended up winning there and immediately became my favorite player. And driving home to New Jersey that year was when I started telling my parents, yeah, you know, do we know anybody that plays golf? Like, how do I get into this? You know, what does this look like? And began my journey as a caddy at Somerset Hills, is where I grew up caddying. You referenced Basking Ridge Country Club, which is where we played all of our high school matches. Yeah, this big bar overlooking 18 with this par 3, you know, massive green was where I played all my high school matches. But that was really my start into golf. Davis Love was the player that I referenced, and he's who I tried to emulate and be like. You know, my education as a kid, you know, before we had YouTube, was I would VCR when he would play in tournaments, rewind and replay it, and rewind and replay it, and go in the backyard and try to imitate what I was seeing. And that's what became this beautiful journey that has become my life in golf.
Well, I think that's incredible because you reference a lot on the Inward 9 podcast. You know, you just had Devin Gee on, the head pro at Oakmont, talking about defining moments in your life. So I'd say, you know, that's one of those defining moments, considering how much of your life you've dedicated to the sport and kind of how you were introduced to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny for me. It's like I still have never played Harbortown. It's been, you know, over 30 years, and I still haven't gone back to where it all really started for me. But yeah, I think the journeys that we talk about on my podcast, I imagine you talk about here, is you see these circles get closed all the time. And 12 years after meeting Davis, I ended up at Seminole Golf Club and got to meet him and caddy for him. And then you fast forward another 12 years, and I end up at Hazeltine, and he ends up being our captain for the 2016 Ryder Cup. So there's a cyclical nature to golf. We talk about a lot. I had never heard where the story of 6 degrees of separation came from. I'll share it real quick because it's fascinating. 6 degrees of separation came from a social experiment. I think it was run in the 70s. I heard this story from a Malcolm Gladwell book, but I think somebody mailed like 100 letters out to the Midwest, in St. Louis and Missouri and Omaha, and said, hey, we're trying to get this letter to this person in Boston who's a financial advisor. Can you forward this note to the person you think has the best chance of getting that note to them? Add your name to the list and forward it. And when those letters eventually reached Boston, the average transaction was 6 people. And I think when we look at golf, it ends up coming down to like 2 or 3 people, 2 to 3 degrees of separation. Most often, we all know the same people, and I think that's kind of been the fun of the artwork that I've done. Is these logos unlock all of these conversations. Like Jason, that logo you're wearing, I understand that's a course in Michigan. I just heard that story at the PGA Championship a few weeks ago. So you look at the Michigan logo over your left shoulder. We all know what that means to Sean. But logos are kind of how we find our people, right? And our tribe and the people that see the world like we do. So that's really been it for me in golf is like, one door has led to another and one person has led to another. And but that's where it all started for me was at Harbortown in 92.
That's Kevin Bacon, right? The Degrees of Separation, the movies he's been in. He's been in movies with everybody and done a great job. And, I look at your career at Somerset and then Merion and then Hazeltine and Seminole. You've been to some of the best places that have instilled a lot of what you believe in the game. And what was it like as a caddy at Somerset? And it sounds like, did you start caddying after you kind of fell in love with it at Harbortown, or what was that like?
That was it, Sean. I tried to find out who are some people that I know that play golf, and all roads kind of pointed towards start caddying at Somerset Hills. So kind of walked into that experience, eyes wide shut. Didn't really know how to play the game or certainly coach the people on the game. I kind of laughed to think about what kind of knowledge they would have gotten from me at that age of 14 to 15. But that's how I learned not only just how to play the game, but how to talk to adults. And watching those people play the game, they helped me learn how to play the game. There's so many life lessons that you learn as a caddy and your level of responsibility and growing up in that environment. But I don't think life will ever get as good as Caddy Mondays for me. When me and my buddy, before we had our driver's license, we get dropped off at about 7 a.m. in the morning at Somerset Hills. We play roughly 36 holes. The 8th hole goes right along the road that leads back into town. So we just kind of leave our bags in the woods, walk into town, we get lunch and ice cream, come back, we play another 36 and, putt till dark. And, we never get tired. I don't know if life will ever get that good again. But Somerset Hills to this day, remains my favorite place in the game of golf.
I couldn't agree with you more, Chandler. As a fellow former looper, greatest job in the world. The Mondays, now we're at a point where a lot of clubs, especially since 2008, a lot more outings on Mondays. So, the frequency of those days aren't what they used to be. But if it was an open Monday, the same way, I'd ride my bike, bag on my back. I worked with a couple of my cousins and my sister, and we would try to get at least 72 holes in on a Monday if we could. But also the experience of being a caddy, like you said, learning how to talk to adults, when to ask the right questions, when to shut up. My rule was always, especially Saturday mornings, this is downtime for these people. This is my job. Let them have their pleasantries for the first couple holes and wait for that first errant tee shot before you interject with a question, and then ask an open-ended question. Get to know the person, and hopefully they return fire to you. It was great.
Yeah. I mean, look at what you do today. I mean, all those lessons prepared you for the rest of life. It's different than bagging groceries and just putting your head down or stocking the shelves at a store. My first job before caddy was Little League umpire. So at a very young age, I got very familiar with adults yelling at me and questioning my decisions and having to stand firm on decisions. And that just lent more towards caddying. And I know we're going to talk about the Evans Scholarship on this show, but caddying I think is, I push as many teens as I can. I would love it if my daughters got into it as well, because of how much it just prepares you for the rest of life.
No doubt.
Chandler, as we think about some of your stops across your career, it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about working with Bob Ford, legendary golf professional, especially now that the U.S. Open's coming up at Oakmont, and kind of hear some of the lessons you learned from his leadership and working under him at Seminole.
Well, why don't I start by sharing the story of when I first met Bob at Oakmont, just with the U.S. Open going on this week. I had gotten hired by Bob without an interview. I had worked for a gentleman in New Jersey at Canubrook Country Club named Greg Lecker. Greg was a former assistant at Oakmont, and Canubrook was kind of the underground railroad towards Oakmont. If you did a great job for Greg, Bob, for about a decade there, was hiring Greg's assistants without any interview, just off the recommendation of Greg saying, this guy's ready. So I get hired by Bob in the spring of 2004 to go down there in the fall. And Bob says, hey, you're going to come out here this later this summer. You're going to play with me. We'll get to know each other. And then I'll see you in Florida. So we play the round of golf, and this is peak. Bob is now the pro at Oakmont and Seminole. His playing days are at its peak. And we finished the round, and we end up on the porch at Oakmont. And there's 8 of us at this table, 2 groups. The soups come out, and I start eating my soup. And then all of a sudden I notice that the whole table has gone quiet. And they're all looking at me, which isn't a good feeling. And I'm sitting there just holding my spoon and kind of looking around. I thought I'd spilled soup on my shirt. And I kind of look at the pro who I was working for in New Jersey to my left. I'm like, what? And he goes, come on, Junior. Like, look at how you're holding the spoon. You know, he's like, you've got to hold it like this, you know, like a pencil. And I've been holding it like a shovel. And then I kind of look over at Bob, and Bob's shaking his head. And my boss, Greg, kind of goes, hey, Bob, like, I'm going to work with him. We'll have him ready. Don't worry. He's coachable. He's coachable. And in that moment, I learned a lot about Bob, you know, what he valued, you know, as far as table manners, your presence, and the kind of people that we were going to be around at places like Oakmont and Seminole. And then it was just a 2-year education of observation, of watching one of the best day in and day out do what he did so well. You can learn a lot by just keeping your eyes open and your mouth shut. And with Bob, it was things just like watching him interact with such a range of personalities and egos and the people that walk through these places. You know, Bob had really come from Pittsburgh, which is Arnold Palmer territory. And what Arnold had done so well was just making people feel like they're the only person in the room, how present Bob was able to be with those people, but also just watching, you know, Bob's decision-making, how he processed information, how he gathered information, and then landed on the decisions that he did. There were countless lessons that I think even today I'm still kind of going, I learned that in Florida. How to play in the wind was something that Bob taught me and paid off in my playing lesson at Hazeltine when I was playing in a 30-mile-an-hour wind and shot even. He prepared you for so much. It was a high-speed education, but again, a lot of it was he didn't have to tell you what to do. You just able to watch him like I did with Davis Love on VCR and then just try to emulate what you were saying as he went forward.
I was fortunate enough to play. Bob came up to Oakland Hills and did a little speech, made a round with him, and he spoke glowingly about the assistance that he got to move on to heads and through his tutelage, and he was so proud of it. And that's one thing that I don't know how many guys he's put in to be head pros across the country. It's got to be dozens, I would imagine, right?
It's well over 50. I remember at his retirement, they kind of presented him with this Oakmont Seminole split flag, and then they had the roster of assistants on both sides. I mean, it might have been over 100 that moved on to other jobs. When he did it for 37 years, when you're moving one out of there every 2 to 3 years, it expedites pretty quickly.
So you move on from there to the Hazeltine opportunity, and that was a great experience in Minnesota. You're still living in Minnesota, so obviously you love it out there. What was the transition like for you from assistant to pro, and then obviously the big event with the awesome Ryder Cup in 16?
Yeah, when I was at Merion, I used to watch the head pro, Scott and I, kind of walk around. You could tell that his mind was someplace else. A lot of times, I try to slow him down, be like, hey, these 3 things, this person's looking for you, kind of get some feedback. And you kind of see his mind was always kind of working someplace else. And I think that's what I started to realize. And I remember calling Scott once I got to the top, after about a half a year, I'm like, I start to understand you more now. Because my mind was always kind of on where we are going. Whereas as an assistant, you're more really on the day-to-day task and the execution. And once you get to the top, you're more of the visionary about where are we actually going as a club? What is this program that I'm going to create? How can I improve this process? What do we need from a staffing level standpoint? My mind was constantly on the future. So I think that was probably the biggest shift, Sean. It was just, as an assistant, you're really there to execute the X's and O's. But once you get to the top, it's really about leading the ship and where you're going.
So I think moving into the Ryder Cup, and you had Davis Love, somebody you followed for a long time as the captain. What was that like being the head pro at a club hosting the Ryder Cup?
Well, there's a lot of hats that you have to wear. One, you're kind of interacting with the local community to help them understand. We kind of lied to them for years. We told them, like, hey, guys, this is the one time the Ryder Cup's going to happen at this club in your lifetime. Now it's coming back in 29, which we know it's the first time that it's ever happened at an American club. That's happened twice. But we were trying to educate the local community about what is this event? Why is it different than a U.S. Open or a PGA? Why is it unique? Working with the PGA of America about their preparation, their execution, and how we could support them. And then there was the Davis Love aspect, which I was sitting in my office. It was early 2015. The Americans had just lost their third straight Ryder Cup in Scotland the year before. They kind of formed this task force. They're trying to put the train back on the tracks. And we weren't sure who the captain was going to be, given the circumstances. Davis, a captain in 2012, had given up a 10-6 lead on Sunday for a tough loss at Medina. So, I kind of figured his window is closed. No one's ever done it twice after losing. But I got a text one night in February from the late Tim Rosafort, who I knew from my time at Seminole. And, Tim said, I remember you from your time down here. You need to know they're going to name Davis Love as captain on Monday. And I sat there and looked at the text for 15 minutes. I was the only one in the office. It was kind of snowing outside, and started to imagine, what are the next 2 years going to look like if this is a reality. And my mindset, I was already excited about the Ryder Cup, but my mindset was shifting into how can I help? And I could fill up a 10-hour podcast about how I was able to help from behind the scenes, from a data and an analysis and a course setup standpoint. And I give Davis a lot of credit. When he's lost one, when he showed up to Hazeltine, he was willing to think about things differently. And when I was able to kind of put some data in front of him that he wasn't aware of, we saw a real shift in the approach of the team. And the result was the result. Knowing you guys were going to ask about the Ryder Cup, I was trying to think about all the stories that I could tell, and what it really meant to be the head pro to host an event like that. I'm going to tell a quick story about a young lady here from Minnesota that I think kind of captures what it's really about. It's a great reminder for me, just even in the moment. We got called by Augusta in 2015. They had started the drive, chip, and putt, and they had it for a few years, but they were looking to have the regional finals, the stop where these young kids would come, hit their shots, and if the top qualifier would make it through to Augusta, they were looking to take it to the substantial championship places like an Oakland Hills, a Hazeltine, or a Baltusrol, or a Torrey Pines out west, or a Chambers Bay in Seattle, that these young kids will get a championship experience even if they didn't make it to Augusta. So, when Augusta calls and says, hey, would you do this for us? You're kind of like, well, yeah, of course. So I didn't really know what to expect. But the first year, these families are showing up from Texas and Kansas and Arkansas, and throughout the Midwest. They're coming to Minnesota to hit 9 competitive shots, 3 drives, 3 chips, 3 putts. And the top 1 out of every 10 in every age and sex category are going to go to Augusta. And I'm not really sure to expect, but the oldest girls group finishes first, and we put the final score up there for their group. And this dad hugs his 14-year-old daughter from behind, and they're crying. And I'm like, oh my God, that girl's going to go hit shots at Augusta, which is something that didn't happen for the first 80 years. So we get on through to one of the younger girls groups, and this girl, I kind of kept an eye on her, comes off the putting green and puts her score up there, and she ties for the lead. And we kind of had to get the rule book out and figure out what the tiebreaker was, and it was points on putts. And look up, and she lost by 2 points on the putting. And so we had to give the tiebreaker to the other girl, and she's bawling her eyes out right behind me. But when the time came, she walked forward, wiped the tears away, smiled, congratulated the other girl, and it was this beautiful moment. But I got to know her and her family. They're from Inver Grove Heights here in Minnesota. And Augusta calls the next winter and says, hey, you got the Ryder Cup, and these regional finals are held in early September. Would you mind doing it again? Because you're going to have the whole city, set up for the Ryder Cup and these families to come again. I was like, yeah, well, that was a great experience. Let's do it again. So we come again the next September, and here comes this girl again. She's qualified for the regional finals again. And this time she wins her whole category by 2 points. So now she's going to Augusta. Great moment. Got to know her a lot more that year. And then three weeks later, now here comes the Ryder Cup. And I think it was on Wednesday, I was heading to an interview in the press tent, and I'm walking across the range tee, and the American team was on the putting green. So there are these big grandstands behind the practice range, and I see one man at the top of the grandstand kind of overlooking the putting green. And he turns around, and it's this girl's father. He kind of comes down the grandstand. How you doing? And I said, what's going on? He goes, well, my daughters are on the fence back there. She's hoping to meet Jordan Spieth. And I'm looking at my watch, and I'm like, man, I'm already like 5 minutes late for this interview, but how do I not try to facilitate this meeting right now? So I went over the bridge, I see her by the fence, kind of wave at her. I went up to Tom Lehman, who's one of the assistant captains, and I played the Minnesota card. I said, Tom, here's what we got. This young lady over there just qualified to go to Augusta next year. Great comeback story after a hard defeat last year. She just wants to meet Jordan. And Tom's kind of looking over at her, and he goes, can you get her up here on the green? Because if Jordan has to go over there, the whole thing's done. I say, well, let me see what I can do. So I go over to her. She's on the fence. She's bouncing off the wall. She had handmade this Augusta plate. She's hoping to get Jordan to sign it. And I kind of small talk with her for a minute. I said, so what do you got there? She goes, well, I made this for Jordan. I hope he would sign it. I know it's a long shot that I'm going to meet him standing here, but I said, yeah, they're actually just about to finish practicing, and they're going to go. They have to go to some media obligations, kind of messing with her. But I said, it's probably not going to happen, but I want to do something really fun with you. Would you trust me? Would you get out of this crowd of people, it was like 50 deep, and just meet me back over in that corner over there? And she's kind of looking at me like, I'm not giving up this spot. I've been standing here for 2 hours. And but she trusted me, and she got out, and I met her in the back, and I said, all right, thanks for trusting me. I said, now let's go meet Jordan Spieth. The look on her eyes, we walked over the bridge, and you walk up to the green, and Jordan was fantastic. He came over, spent some time with her, pictures with her, and then all the captains. Tiger was an assistant captain that year, big pictures with all the captains. And I kind of had to leave. Now I'm 15 minutes late for this interview, but kind of walking over that bridge, I think in life, I think there are two types of people. I think there are here I am type people, which is, people walk into a room, they're like, everyone should come to me, or there you are. And I think in my career, I've tried to be a there you are people and look and kind of walk slowly through the crowd and share those moments. I'm already getting a great experience with Davis being the captain and my involvement, but throughout the week, whether it's the junior players and this young lady named Isabella McCauley, who now has won Big Tens for Minnesota. She played in the Augusta Women's National Women's Amateur this last year.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
There are these moments that can inspire people that they kind of happen when they happen. But if you kind of have your head down and you're walking through the crowd, you kind of miss the magic, right? So I think that story kind of summarizes what being the pro was for me, and just the opportunity that you have to have that impact on the lives of people around you.
Right, and to see the joy and excitement on someone's face that you created, I think it's incredible. And all these years later, that's still one of your biggest memories from hosting the Ryder Cup is probably just looking at how excited she was. So
it's not the Reed or McIlroy putt, or it's not one of those things. It was that moment.
Those are all in there. Yeah,
that's pretty crazy to think about. Was that the year Spieth won the Masters? Did he win 16?
No, so he won in 15.
Won in 15,
set some records. Right. 16 was the year he switched it in the drink on 12 twice, right. And Danny Willett won. So we were wondering, how's Jordan going to be when he shows up here in the fall after a loss like that? And this was the year that I think the week after he was on spring break with Ricky Fowler, Justin Thomas, and Smiley Kaufman. They call it Spring Break 2K, and they were all over Snapchat and social media, and it was like, I don't think Jordan's going to be a problem come this fall. He's rolling with it pretty good. I think, friends can help you do that.
That's one of those moments, we're in an instant gratification world, and everyone thinks in terms of 15 minutes I'll never get back. Those are 15 minutes you'll never regret. Missing the interview, they come and go, but knowing the potential trickle-down effect that we've now seen play out with this young woman, that's incredible. Those are the stories that keep you coming back.
Yeah, she actually wrote me a note, a few weeks later to thank me, and it's something I kept in the top drawer of my desk for all the rest of the years I was there. I was like, if I ever kind of losing focus on why I'm doing this job, we kind of fell back to that letter every now and then.
And something you've brought up a little bit as we're talking, and in our correspondence before filming, you talked about how you've been in the relationship business for the last 30 years. So most of our audience is going to be financial advisors and finance related, but I think there's a lot of parallels in that relationship business. Can we talk a little bit about that specifically?
I think no matter if you're a golf professional, you work in the finance industry, I think there's two things going on. I mean, one, we're all problem solvers. Whether you're a golf professional trying to help somebody with a slice, a hook, trying to get on a golf course, trying to fit them for a set of clubs, endless things that you're trying to help people with, and finances speak for themselves as far as the problems that you solve for people. But it comes down to a level of trust and the relationship that you've built, right? I ran into a man when I was at Merion who actually lives in Minnesota, of all places, who I hadn't heard of at the time. His name was Harvey McKay. Now, Harvey was a envelope business kind of guy, but he's an author. He's written books like How to Swim with the Sharks Without Being Eaten Alive, How to Use Your Head to Get Your Foot in the Door, and then my favorite is Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty, and just having the emphasis on, look, there's going to come a day where you're going to need people to help you. Have you done that work and built those relationships for when that time and when it comes? And on the day that I left Hazeltine in the fall of 2021, I remember telling my wife, I'm like, we're about to put something that Harvey says to the test. Harvey had this saying that he said, look, you can take away my company, my employees, my assets. You can take it all away from me, but you leave me with my contact book, and I'll be right back to where I was within 3 to 5 years. And I said, we're not leaving empty-handed. I kind of heard Bob talk on my own podcast a few weeks ago, as you kind of mentioned listening, that you heard Bob say, he goes, look, I'd done a lot of sowing. And when his time came to reap, he had a lot of people advocating for him. And I think as I look at my time in golf over 20 years, I'd done a lot of the right things because I never wanted anything in return. I thought I was going to be a pro for the next 30 years. I just was trying to do the right things and treat people the right way. But there did come a time in my life where I needed a lot of help. Sean was involved in the process that we went through in 2022 with the permissions, and all these people that were part of my life through golf, were there to advocate for me and help me at a time that we needed them the most. So relationships don't happen overnight, but when you have a mutual respect and trust that's built, I think there's no end to what people can do to help each other.
I must say that must have been a monumental task to do as we kind of transition here to the Archive 22 and the amazing art that you've done with the logos and the history of the game and how much you enjoy doing that. But as a consumer of your product, I can tell you it brings a certain emotion to you when you see all the different logos and think about the history of the game. What was it like, though, calling these clubs and asking them for permission to get to have the ability to provide these wonderful posters that you've put out there in the history of the game for fans of golf?
Well, it's terrifying. In a word, I've continued to tell people I was completely scared, not just to approach these clubs and to ask for something that's never been asked for before, but that one or a few of them might say no, and then the whole project was going to be gone. So to kind of frame what you're referring to, if people aren't familiar, I resigned from being a head professional at Hazeltine in 2021, and it was done with a shift on just being a more available husband and father. I loved being a golf professional. I wouldn't change any of it. I wouldn't give it all back. I miss it. But it's a time demanding job, for the season that we're in, the hours that go into it, it's sacrificial. And when I was young and single, there's nowhere else I wanted to be. But as life goes along and now we have 3 daughters, there's more people that want to spend time with you. And I just didn't have anything left for them. So we jumped off in the fall of 21 without really a plan. And, that print that is over Jason's right shoulder, that was the original U.S. Open print that I had drawn in 2018. It was for me, Sean. It was for anybody else. It was just for me to have in my office and, spark these conversations and connect with other people. Golf Digest wrote an article on my artwork that Christmas Eve, which was a great present. And it was a nudge to pursue what we're actually doing right now. And I had to kind of go back to the USGA and the PGA and say, all right, is there any life to this? What do you guys think? And both organizations were like, yeah, we love it, but those logos on there, they don't belong to us. I never heard the words intellectual property before. So we learned pretty quick that this was going to be bigger than just getting the USGA on board. There were 51 clubs on at the time that we had to go strike an agreement with all 51 clubs. And so my point of what I just said is like, look, if a few of these clubs say, no, this isn't for us, then, we're out of business and I'm probably doing something else. I'm not on this call with you today, but over the course of about 8 months, starting the spring of 22 all the way through Christmas, it was, Zoom calls like we're on right now. It was in person. And it wasn't always me, sometimes it was somebody going in first on my behalf to introduce it. But it was this great tightrope walk without a safety net. Because again, it was being held together by a very thin veil of, if one of these clubs isn't on board, then this isn't going to see the light of day. But I think, Sean, what happened over time was the clubs understood why this is good for them. I'll quote a club in Chicago that kind of said, look, we're 130 years old. We've never given commercial use of our logo. So that's a non-starter. But, this is tastefully done, and it's a great representation of our place in the game, which we're rather proud of. And they said, look, if this is still on the train tracks, when you get down towards the end, come back to us. We'll be there for you. And I think everyone kind of adapted that group mindset of, and we got some momentum going, as most things go, even especially when you're in the financial world. You get some momentum behind something. It's like we got a couple big names, and some clubs felt comfortable with, like, oh, if those clubs are in, then we're in. And then it got down to the end where it's like, no one wanted to be the last one, and no one wanted to sit it out at the end. So
we're at the last holdout, and then everyone's going to be mad at them.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I think once we got down to the end, it made sense for everyone. It was where it didn't in the beginning. But again, I think about 500 people got involved by the time it was all over 8 months. So it was a range of people from my background in golf and people that I've been around who wanted to support me in this vision. And once the first domino fell, now they've all been following, and we've moved on from golf into another sport, which we know we're very passionate about with hockey, and just filled with gratitude that I get to go down this journey.
So let's talk a little bit about just Archive 22. What's behind the name? How did you pick that? Because I think there's some meaning there as well.
Yeah, there is. How do you name a company? And it was days on the beach down in Sanibel, Florida, just kind of thinking about who are we and what is this about and what is our brand. And we're a historical-based company. All the pieces of artwork that I do are trying to shine a light on history or storytelling, and done through the use of logos primarily. But Archive is kind of a nod to my time at Merion. They had the archive room, which is full of all their history and memorabilia. But Merion was really the place where they helped me understand and appreciate the history of the game. And we talked about it all the time there. So Archive was a nod to them. Shocker when you go to copyright the name of a company that Archive was already taken. So we had to differentiate a little bit. And the 22 is kind of a wink also at a meeting that I had on February 2nd, 2022 with the head golf professional from the country club in Brookline, Brendan Walsh. Now, Brookline was going to host the U.S. Open that year, and Brendan's been a great sounding board for me for a long time. So when I went out to Brendan, we had a Zoom call like this, and I said, here's what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? Any opportunity here? Would you support this? And he said, you got it. And I think, that night, I remember my oldest daughter came home from school, and I was starting to get a vision of where we're going as a family and a company. And I watched the greatest game ever played with her, and bawled my eyes out at the end because I think Jason, we're kind of an underdog story. I saw myself in Francis Ouimet. I had a big dream for where we wanted to go, and when somebody gives you that vote of confidence that we believe in you, it's a start. I think my wife kind of jokes now. I remember telling her in the kitchen a few weeks later, I was like, I think I know what we need to become, and she goes, "This ought to be good." She was kind of waiting to hear, like, what are we going to do next? And I said, I think the artwork has some legs. And she goes, I do too, but what else? Because we're not going to feed this family just selling artwork. And I said, I think this is it. And I'll probably get emotional talking about this aspect, but I think people need to hear it. Without her getting behind this, we're not a company. We talk about all these clubs that got behind this, but really without her, she could have shot it down from the start. And one of my favorite movies is Field of Dreams. And when you watch that movie now, I used to always think that movie was about Ray Kinsella and reconciling with his dad, or it was about Shoeless Joe Jackson getting redemption and a chance to come back and play, or it was about Moonlight Graham, finally getting that at bat that he never got, or it was about Terrence Mann, admitting a dream that he never admitted to anybody. And what I missed in all that was Ray Kinsella's wife, Annie. When Ray Kinsella wakes up in the middle of the night and it was like, I want to build this dream. Do you think I'm crazy? And she goes, yeah, you are. But she also said, if this is something you think you need to do, then you need to do it. And you need somebody to just be that level of crazy with you to do something that actually is that big, and to plow over your field, build a baseball diamond for a ghost. And, it's really her also, when you keep watching that movie, that, when the bank came calling and they were going to foreclose the land, that she held them off because she saw the magic and she told her husband to keep going. So that's really what the last 3 years have been. We're a company of two people, and we both have the same vision. We see the potential, we see the magic, we see the ghost, and as time goes along, we hope that it'll become more of a reality to other people around us.
Well, the interesting thing too, because art, you want to feel emotion, right? When you're looking at any kind of art. And with the historical aspect that you're doing, for instance, with the U.S. Open right behind my shoulder, a lot of people, when they look at that, they can remember a specific moment when they were watching that U.S. Open, whether it was DJ winning in 2016 at Oakmont, or obviously the rules fiasco that happened there. I think it was penalized, but I think every time you look at it, you can look at courses, you remember your favorite time golfing there, who you were golfing with. So it lends itself to that emotional connectivity.
It does, and that's kind of the brand and the story that we're trying to build. And how do I communicate that to people and get them to understand? It's not just a couple names on a piece of paper. I mean, I'm looking right over your shoulder. 99 at Pinehurst was my first U.S. Open as a 21-year-old kid. I was on 19 when Payne made the putt. I was rooting for him to miss the putt because I want to watch a playoff.
Right.
And we didn't know what a great moment we were getting. But everyone has a story and a connection with the game, and there's reasons that they love it. There are places that they're going. There are people that we know in common. We talked about the 6 degrees of separation. But for me, I had a moment with a woman at Pinehurst last year. It was one of the last prints that I had to personalize and sign. And this woman comes up to my desk, and the volunteers all have their lanyards. But if you've been volunteering for the USJ for a long time, you get kind of a ribbon added to the bottom. It might say volunteer 5+ years, 10+ years, 15+. And this woman had a 25+. And she's coming over and looking at the artwork. She goes, "What is this?" And I kind of explain it. And she's looking at it some more. And I said, "Hey, Mary, 25+ years, you've seen some things, huh?" And her friend goes, Mary and her husband, volunteered together for this tournament for, over 20 years. But, her badge says 25. And don't ask me what possessed me to say it, because it's almost like asking a woman, are you pregnant? Right. Which I've done once in my life, and I'll never do it again.
Never do that one again.
And you were wrong.
I was wrong. Yep. But I just decided, I asked the woman, I said, "Is your husband no longer here?" And now she's nodding her head, and she's starting to cry. And the woman who's volunteering for me on my side of the desk is starting to cry. And she goes, I want one of these. And I said, "Would you let me personalize it to you?" And she's nodding. And I said, "Why don't you come over next to me while I sign?" And I remember signing it along the lines of, and it's a personalization I use for a lot of people, but I said, "Mary, may this always bring you back to the moments that you got to share with the people that are closest to you." And I'm starting to cry as I finish it. I'm selling out on Friday, and she's getting one of these last ones, and she's giving me a big hug. But I think that's really, at the end of the day, that's what I want people to have, is just a memory of the places that we get to go and who we get to share them with. It's history, but it's a lot of things, and it's something different usually to everyone who gets involved with it.
Definitely.
Going to make us start crying telling stories like that.
Well, the Field of Dreams one got me. I had to shut up for a while.
Yep.
Sean's
The
wiping
greatest
tears.
game ever played, too.
What's that,
the
man?
caddy scene. The caddy scene where the club's trying to get him to switch Eddie off the bag.
Yep.
Don't ever talk to my caddy again. That gets me every time.
Yep.
That's when you talked about the NHL stuff you've done as well, and obviously my two sports are golf and hockey, and it's probably why we're good friends, Chandler. But I'm curious to know, on the original 6 picture you did inside the logo, how did you come up with that, and where did that process start with the NHL? But that is the coolest. Talk about exuding emotions of the original 6 inside the NHL logo. And if you haven't seen this, we'll have Charlie pop it up on this video. But it's unbelievably cool, and I think it's going to be one that exudes a lot of emotion from people.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. The process with the NHL is just another great reminder. On my own podcast, I just try to remind people to constantly be curious about the other people that are around you. You just never know who's going to walk into your story. One second. So in the spring of 2023, I made a post. I have some good friends of mine. I'm a passionate New York Ranger fan, although now working for the NHL, the company line is I'm a fan of all 32 teams, which actually is becoming the reality for me. I mean, Sean knows I'm a hockey junkie. I hope the finals goes all 7, and I hope it actually goes back to Canada. It's been 32 years. I know that's sacrilege for some people, but to watch, if Connor McDavid were to host this, I mean, what a win for hockey. If Florida wins, hey, the beat will roll on. But back to the spring of 23, somebody got my DMs after this post. I put on a New York Rangers hoodie that my friends had sent me with the company called We Bleed Blue. And I get this DM from a guy. He goes, "What's with the Rangers hoodie?" I said, "Well, that's my favorite team." He goes, No. You're out in Minnesota. I thought you were a Wild fan." And I said, "No, I'm from the East Coast. Let's go Rangers." And he goes, "Man, I thought you were a good guy. I've been following your journey." And he's got no description on his profile. It just says, J Day 410. And I said, "Who are you?" And he goes, "I'm just kidding with you." He goes, I've been following your journey for a while. Big fan of what you're doing. I actually work for the NHL. I used to work for the Metropolitan Golf Association." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Why don't we get on a call one night? I'd love to get to know you." I had in my head that I wanted to get to the NHL at some point. I just didn't know where to start. So we get on this call, and I'm wearing hockey stuff for the call, and he's wearing golf stuff. I think the hockey guys are the greatest because they all love the game of golf. They're all playing all summer. And we had a great call. And at the end of it, I just said, "Jeff, you could help me out here. I want to get to the NHL with the artwork, but I don't even know who to start with." He put me in the office with Brian Jennings, is the chief branding officer of the NHL, July 11th, 2023 in New York City, and sold my vision to Brian. He was on board. He kind of put me up to licensing, and that process took longer than I wanted to. We talked about instant gratification at the start of this call. I would have loved for that to happen a lot faster, but my appreciation, my gratitude for what I'm getting to do now probably wouldn't have been the same. So over the process of the next 18 months, we started with a brand that was very similar to golf, which was we wanted to tell the story, starting with the evolution of the league. How did we get from the 6 teams in 1926 to the 32 that we have today? How did these teams move? Minnesota to Dallas, Kansas City to Colorado to New Jersey, Hartford to Carolina, Quebec to Colorado, Atlanta to Calgary, the movement, and when did these teams come into the league, how their logos changed. So we wanted to start with some basic storytelling. You kind of see the one over my left shoulder there, the history of the Stanley Cup. Who was Lord Stanley of Preston? Who are the teams that have won it? Who's won it the most? Who's the most recent? Which teams have only won it once? Which teams haven't won it? And then getting into some of the original 6 pieces that Sean kind of mentioned, and then just, the NHL Shield, they're the 6 logos kind of overlapping, starting with them. I mean, all 6 of those logos are great. They're iconic. They're timeless. They're identifiable. And just trying to do some things that I haven't seen out there that I think the litmus test for me with anything that I do is like, would I want this on my wall? That's where I started with that first piece, the U.S. Open piece that you have right over your shoulder, Jason. And just, I've tried to look at it through that lens is like, would I enjoy having this in my own home? And you hope that if you do something that you find to be tasteful, that you attract the people around you that see it in the same light. So, it's tough, Sean. They don't always let me color outside the lines. When I did that piece, they're like, well, you have to have the full logos underneath it. You can't crop this logo and take pieces off of that. Right. So, I play the game of golf. We play by the rules when no one's looking. So I've been a pretty easy account for them. But I am looking to constantly do the thing that hasn't been done before. If we have time to talk about the Stanley Cup piece that will hopefully start this next winter, that is certainly in that category. It's
you're gonna put all the logos inside the cup. That would be wicked.
No, it's not that. It is, my goal from the start of this. It's funny. I had dinner with you and John Buccigross in January of 2022, right as we're starting this. And I remember talking about it at dinner with you guys that night. You remember we had to show our COVID vaccination cards to get into that bar?
Gosh, I do remember that. It was worth it, though. We got in. So
we did. We did.
With the things we do to have a beer.
So during that dinner, I had started to share the vision of, I'd found an approach to drawing trophies. Trophies are kind of tricky. If you take a picture of a trophy, it's reflective and you can't see the detail. If you have somebody paints a trophy, they can do the shading, but with a pencil, I can take all the glare off of the trophy. And with the tip of my pencil, I can get right down into every engraving, every name that's ever been engraved on a trophy. So that was really what I shared with Brian Jennings in New York of 23 was the vision for Lord Stanley. And we've had to do these other pieces first, but over the last 2 years, it has been a journey of working with the league, Phil Pritchard at the Hockey Hall of Fame, Devin Smith and Marty McQuaig with the National Hockey League Players Association, and then Glenn Healy and Adam Larry with the NHL alumni to really get everyone on board for what would it look like for me to render the Stanley Cup in its entirety? Not just one side, but every side. So, if your name is Mary Lemieux or Bobby Orr, or Ray Bork or anybody who's on the Stanley Cup, that I would have a side with your name clearly identifiable. And I think Phil Pritchard nailed it, and he said what I believe to be true, because I talked to a number of players that have won the Stanley Cup, is, look, we know how the cup works. You get a day or two with it if you're lucky. You party with it, and then it's kind of gone. And it wasn't until the last 2 years that the Florida Panthers and the Vegas Knights had engraved the cup before the players got to party with it and actually get to point and show people their name on it. Phil Pritchard was like, look, I know guys who have still never seen their name on the cup. They've never seen the cup with their name on it. So while the players get a ring, what I am trying to give back to the players and now share with the fans and bring them in closer is the history of the Stanley Cup, and let people have it in their homes. When you go to Toronto, and I've been there, it's a great experience. Encourage anybody who loves the game of hockey to go. But when you go to Toronto, you wait in line, you go to that big vaulted room ceiling, you get the Art Ross trophy and the Norris and the Vezina and all the trophies, and you get up there, and then there's the cup. And you wait in line, you get up there, and you get your picture, and you kind of get your 30, 60 seconds because other people are waiting, and maybe you get to see your favorite team engraving, and then you're on to the next. You really don't get to study it. You can go in the vault and see the rings that have been retired, but I just want to allow people to slow down and have more time with it and really look at the teams and the names and relive those moments the same way that they do with the golf artwork. But it's been a 2-year journey. Again, we're doing something that's never been attempted before or even tried to be negotiated. I think we're going to hammer out the legal this summer, and then I'll hope to get down to my desk this next winter when the snow's flying in Minnesota and try to hammer it out.
That sounds incredible. I mean, to essentially personalize it for that player you're looking for, or in some cases, the player themselves. I mean, that's a huge undertaking.
It is.
Yeah, it sounds like you're gonna be busy.
Congratulate me if I pull it off.
Yeah, right. We'll send you a congratulatory note. I think it'd be a good time to chat a little bit about the U.S. Open now and just talk about. I mean, this is the best time of year for me personally. You have Father's Day, my birthday, the U.S. Open, and the NHL Stanley Cup kicking off, and it's the best. So, for you at Oakmont, what give me a hole that you're looking at that could be, a real pivotal piece of this puzzle? I know it's hard because there's so many difficult holes there, but based on what you're thinking, and then also a player or two that you're looking at this week.
Well, 17 at Oakmont tends to sink or swim whoever is coming down the stretch. It's a drivable par 4. Uphill, you got what's called big mouth bunker front right. You can drive it. It's kind of one of those, are you willing to be patient and lay it back and try to wedge it in, or you want to go at it? Can you get short-sided, stuck in the wrong place? And you can play hockey with that green real quick. So Jim Furyk, I think, was tied for lead there in 07. Drove it short left, came up short, made 5, and he was done on a 300-yard hole. So what I learned at Merion is, that the shorter the hole, the harder it gets for these guys because they're so conditioned to put the gas pedal down and just go for it. And we're starting to see more players be more patient with these holes. But come Sunday, you're going to take your chance there. Somebody could make a 2. Curious to see where they put the hole location, but somebody can make an 8. So that hole will be pivotal. The people that are going to play well at Oakmont, you look at Dustin Johnson and Cabrera and Ernie Els, typically it's been ball strikers. You cannot win at Oakmont, not playing well off the tee. It's just that simple. There are ditches everywhere. You get in some of these ditches and you're going to make a 6, 7, or 8 real quick. So somebody's going to have to drive it well. If you're in play constantly, somebody who's driving it well is going to have a great week and, be near the top of the leaderboard on Sunday.
So one thing, I've seen pictures going around of the rough at Oakmont today, and Bob Ford on your podcast talked about it being a plus winning score, and like Angel Cabrera, you brought up 2007, I think it was +5. The cut line that year was +11.
Yep.
Do you think? I think Bob, he put the parameter on there that if it stays dry, that we'll have a plus finisher.
There's that. It's funny to watch what really stumps these guys anymore because they're so good with their distance control. I remember it rained, torrential rain at Merion in 2013 on Sunday or through the weekend all the way through Monday. And they only got 2 practice rounds, and we all thought with a short golf course they're going to eat it up, and then the winning score was 1 over. Oakmont's a different beast and a different animal altogether. it's so hard to predict. It seems like every time we think we got a golf course that's hard, we're like, Oak Hill, we thought 2 years ago with the PGA, like this is gonna be really hard for those guys, and Koepka, I think, finished at 6, 7, or 8 under. Like they're just so good. They have evolved as athletes. The equipment has helped them. Technology has helped them. I mean, they know exactly how far everything goes these days. We used to laugh back in the day when Bernhard Langer, I remember there's a story where when you used to have to step it off without rangefinders and stuff, his caddy gave him a number one time. He's like, Bernhard, you got 135 to the hole and et cetera, and 121 to carry the bunker. And he goes, is that from the front or the back of the yardage plate?
Oh,
And that was back then before TrackMan. I mean, now these guys have just got it down to like the yard, that when they have to hit a number, no matter if that's 235 in the air or whatever it is, 100, and they come within a yard or two every time. So they're just that much better. That you take a hard place like Oakmont, and as much as we want to believe it'll be over par, and you like to think it should be, and you hope that it is, I start to bet on the players. I'm like, I would bet on red numbers. They're just that good.
No, there's one player in particular who's playing some pretty good golf right now in Scheffler, and him and McIlroy should be able to, hopefully they make the cut and can put on quite a show at Oakmont. It's such a great challenge for these guys to go out and play there. And I agree with you, ball striking off the tee, if you get in those bunkers, it can get ugly quick. But the green speeds, these guys will figure it out. They're good enough putters. They'll move on from the speed. But for folks like us that go out there and try to play it, the greens are a huge problem. But if they're hitting it good, I kind of agree with you that there could be someone who goes low, but I don't know. I think it's going to be over par. Overall, I think it's going to be over par, but we'll see. Mackie, what do you think?
I hope so. I'm ready for the carnage. Definitely think that Scheffler, McIlroy are in the spotlight. But I look at a guy, one I'm keeping an eye on is Morikawa. He's very accurate off the tee, and he's historically been deadly accurate with his irons. I think his percentage with his 6 iron was that of a lot of guys with their 8 or 9 iron, especially when he won at TPC for his PGA championship. So, guys like that, they're going to have a chance. But, if the rough is 5 inches, you got to keep it out. There's just no getting around it. Yeah, I think the power players, the Koepkas, the John Rahms, even the Brysons, aren't going to have the weeks that I think a lot of them are expecting to.
You think that's just because the T-ball will go wayward, Mac?
I do. I do.
It's a former caddy talking. Former caddy talking here.
Well, that's the other part is I think, caddies that have caddied here in the past, whether it be for the same golfer, but have a little bit of extra course knowledge, that's always going to play a role. Can they march it out? Do they need to use the rangefinders? Whatever it may be. That's always a huge, huge help, I think.
Chandler, anyone in particular you're focused on?
There's no one I'm really focused on. I think we tend to get surprised by people, but he went through an injury in off season, but when Xander would get going last year, it was trouble. When he gets his fade going, and it's controlled fade. I mean, there are streaky players like that. We've seen Rory play like that. We've seen Scotty play like that. We've seen Bryson play like that, but no one's really talking about Xander right now. I wonder if he kind of pops back into the equation this week. We'll see.
What do you think?
I think Brian Harmon's another guy like that. All the wiggling and waggling, I'm not the biggest fan of, but he's a major champion, so I can't question him there. But, if he can play his boring game and just be accurate and have any semblance of the putting stats that he had last year, I think he was above 90% inside 10 feet or something crazy like that when he won a couple of years ago. Another guy that, might be boring, but he could be dangerous. It's like Carolina Hurricanes hockey.
Yeah, the old boring hockey, dump and chase and play the neutral zone trap. That's his way he plays golf. No thanks. You can have him. Chandler, moving on. I think one of the areas I wanted to touch, since we have Mackie on the call, is the Evans Scholar. Mackie was obviously our Rock Harbor Evans Scholar here. And what was your experience like at Hazeltine when you came in there? You probably from the East Coast, maybe didn't have that as much and not then got exposure to it. How did the club react to it at Hazeltine, and is it a big part of their overall program?
Yeah, to your point, they had the J Wood Plat out at Merion, and I really hadn't paid much attention to that. It was an older caddy yard. We had a few kids that were younger, but I never heard about any kid getting a caddy scholarship. So I showed up to Hazeltine, and the Evans Scholarship through the Midwest is in full flux because it's really based out of Chicago, Western Golf Association, so through these neighboring states, in Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, and through the Midwest. So I went to the first Evans selection meeting after my first year. The club leaders had kind of say, "Hey, come out to the state. It's really impactful." And we sit down in this room, and these young men and women get kind of toted up to the front in a press conference style meeting in front of a group of sometimes 100 people in blazers, and have to stand at a podium and answer questions from the audience about where they're going with their lives, lessons learned in the caddy yard, and where they're going to go with things, and what the impact of the scholarship is. And I still remember the first, they read these essays, portions of the essays from the candidates, and they knock you back. And I still remember the first one they read from this young lady who kind of talked about how her sister had special needs. And she said, "Look, when I caddy for you, I'm going to tell you about all the trouble. But if she were to caddy for you, she'd say, yeah, there's trees and water left, or there's, deep bunkers to the right, out of bounds over here, there." But she'd just tell you to go for it. I mean, I was already crying like by the first time the first person came out. And then she comes out and speaks like she could be the next president of the United States. And it's just an impactful program. These young men and women are ridiculously smart. So they have to have a certain GPA. They have to have, certain scores on your SAT or ACT. And then they have to put in the work. You can't just caddy 10 times and get this scholarship. A lot of these kids have loops well over 100 over 4 or 5 years, wherever they've been caddying. And then they get the scholarship. You see the impact of that. But then I've seen so many of these people 10 years down the road and where they are with their lives. They are the most confident people. They get put into these Evans houses at these different universities. So they're put in with other people who've had similar upbringings to them. Again, it's all families that need the financial help. So that's really the last component is you can't come from a household that's making $300 to $500K and get the scholarship. It's families that are actually in need. And I've had a greater appreciation and understanding for who Chick Evans is and why he started the scholarship. As a 1916 U.S. Open champion who won with 7 clubs and came from an upbringing like that. And he never really wanted to turn professional, but he wanted to take all these winnings that people wanted to donate and start the caddy scholarship. But what a legacy, over 100 years now later, that how many people have gone through this and how many lives have been impacted. And you've got one right here on your show. You could speak about it firsthand.
12,000 alumni of the scholarship now after the first 2 in 1930 with Harold Fink and Jim McGinnis. So heck of a legacy. I think Chick is a big part of golf's history, just with the way that Western golf and the Evans Scholarship has evolved. But you think about some of the great amateurs. Bobby Jones comes to mind. He wins the USAM at Oakmont, 1925. And that's 2 of 5 amateurs to ever win the U.S. Open. There's always going to be a special place, I think, for amateur golf. And, the invites for the Masters each year and the exemptions that come with. A lot of times that legacy ends when the golf ends. So to have the Francis Ouimets and the Chick Evans of the world, that their legacy is now 100+ years running, it's fantastic. It's changed my life. My sister as well. We were both Evans scholars, so very fortunate on that front. And I'm curious what, from a history standpoint with the U.S. Open, the PGA, the Ryder Cup, the Western Open, and now the BMW Championship is the tournament that's been the big fundraiser for Western golf and the Evans Scholars. How much have you, as a now, I would say, historian of the game, taken the dive into that to explore any opportunities with your artwork there?
A little bit. I can send you a piece that I did for actually Oakland Hills, of all places. Sean, I don't know if you ever saw it. It was kind of this piece with Mike Brady, who used to be the pro there,
Yep.
won the Western Open at Oakland Hills, I think in 1924, I want to say, because it was the 100-year anniversary or 22, somewhere in there. I had drawn the Western Trophy, so kind of seeing the detail that's on it, has seen the list of champions. And I think to your point, we talk a lot about the majors, but people consider the Western to be a major for a long time. So it's still in that category, and it's still part of the FedEx playoffs. but as a storyteller, I don't think people really understand the foundation of who Chick was, what the Western Golf Association is. But it's great to see the publicity that the Evans Scholarship is getting, and the life-changing effect of it. I think that's, at least I can speak through the Midwest. It's no longer a secret, but it's expanding east and west now. We're seeing more universities pick it up, especially going east, slowly migrating west. I mean, hopefully we'll wake up here in 30 years and see it all over the place. I just hope that caddying survives. I think caddying's the danger point in all this. You see a lot of clubs being like, we'll just go with carts. And they're missing the value of, one, receiving the help of a caddy, but also helping those caddies grow.
So here's my plea to the WGA in Archive 22. When you donate money, give an extra $100 and get a beautiful print from Chandler. And I don't know, maybe we'll come up with something, Chandler. We'll figure something out for the WGA, for the Evans to hand out to people. That would be just awesome to display in your office or your home.
We've got some ideas there. To let it kind of keep cooking here for a little bit. I got to get a couple things done for the NHL, but those things are at the foundation of, like, I start to see those opportunities, Sean, like of, back when that U.S. Open print, the one that Jason has, before we ever decided to do anything with it. I remember I was at a auction for Folds of Honor, and that thing brought in over 5,000. I'm sitting in the back of the room like, you guys are nuts. But we know that when we create something that is positioned as you can't buy this anywhere, what it can do. So, what are some things that I can do there in the future that would love to partner with Evans on that? So
Be great.
give it some time. We'll see what we can do. Yep.
I can tell you the merch shop at the BMW Championship, it moves quick. We were out at Castle Pines last year for it, and by Saturday afternoon, it was blank shelves.
Really?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think that's the idea that we've had. I've talked to I'm gonna blank on her first name now. It's Pat White's wife, who works at the WGA, but we talked about doing the same logo piece, with all the clubs that have held the Western, and not commercializing it, but keeping that money in house and getting all the clubs to support it and seeing if we could do something for the Evans. So, like most things in my life, I just need a little bit more time. I need 2 or 3 of me to get all this stuff done. I'm thankful to have a list of projects in front of me, but I'd love to move faster to get a lot of this stuff done.
All right. Well, thank you, Chandler. I know we've taken a lot of time, and the way we've liked to wrap these up is sort of a rapid fire questioning. So
yeah,
we'll see if you can keep it to 1 or 2 words. But I would like to know, as we think about Archive 22, what's the most meaningful piece to you?
Rapid fire. I could tell a story about this one for 10 minutes.
They're all your children.
There. Yeah, exactly. They're all my favorite children. But I would say, the piece I did for the Women's Amateur in 2022 at Chambers Bay, it's not a significant piece, but it's the first time I went out to sell my artwork, and I was so full of enthusiasm, and I'm going to sell out and sell all these, and I sold all 7. And I think it was, coming home from that flight on that, and we're in the middle of the permissions process for the U.S. Open, that I was kind of like, is this going to work? And it really kind of tests your fortitude and your willingness to stick with it. So I think when I look back on that piece now, I realize how far we've come.
Next question is favorite course designer.
Yeah, give me all the Seth Rayners.
Yeah.
Rayner or McDonald's. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, this question's a little closer and near and dear to my heart. Favorite golf course snack, and where do you find it?
Oh, good question. Where do I find it? It's probably because I packed it in my bag, but if I can get a peanut butter and banana sandwich anywhere, that's usually in my bag, and I packed it. I don't think I've ever seen it on a menu anywhere, but a good chocolate chip cookie will get the job done if I'm making the turn too.
All right, I like that one. I think tying it back to the NHL, what's your favorite NHL piece? I know what mine is. I know what Sean's is.
Oh, that original 6 one is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I think the evolution piece is a fun study, and it's a fun storytell, and it's fun to watch, especially young kids engage with it, and them to point at some of the logos and what they notice and where their eyes go. So the evolution's been a lot of fun to start with that one for so far.
I'd say the Hurricanes, when you got the Whalers there, and that's great transition.
Yep.
Go-to walk-up song for the first tee.
Yeah, I'm probably like Mr. Anti-hype and all the attention this stuff guys. And to say that I won't have a song is pretty vanilla. I'll get booed off the show. But a song that's driven me over the last 3 or 4 years has probably been "Don't Forget About Me" by Simple Minds. It's a song that kind of keeps me going, and I want to get back in the spotlight here eventually. But I'd say that'd be one for me.
I'm kind of with you. I like him in the team events, like the Ryder Cup or the Solheim. I know at Inverness they had walk-up songs, and I actually thought it was kind of cool at a team event. For individual events, it's not for me. I'm with you there.
No, let's just put the peg in the ground. Let's get the job done, and we'll have a celebration song later.
Oakmont in one word.
Ditches.
Ditches. I love it.
Where else do you see ditches like that?
You don't.
Those things will swallow you up. So somebody's going to get their round wrecked by some of those.
I played there, and I hit it on 1 to the left, and then on 9 to the left, and then on the left 10 to the right. I was on every ditch.
They're magnets.
What do you do?
They
here?
are absolute magnets.
Well, we have one more, or are we out?
I think we're out.
We're out.
Yeah.
All right. So, thanks for taking the time today. One of the things with Archive 22, I want most of our listeners to be aware is amazing Father's Day gift. You can catch Chandler at Oakmont if you happen to be there this week. And where are you going to be, Chandler, again? You mentioned...
Yep, I'm going to be in the satellite tent. So there's a main merchandise tent out by number 3, and there's a smaller satellite tent on the clubhouse side of Route 76. I'll be kind of right behind the range tee to the right of 18. Find me there.
And are you signing for people, or what's the game plan? Do you have enough time? Do you have a crew there?
I am. Yep. Just me and my prints. Anybody that walks up, we'll personalize them for them. But it's really, for me, it's more about telling my story and trying to engage people and help them understand who I am and what this is and how it came to be.
Well, hopefully you got a semi full of them, because these things are awesome. I can tell you, we see them in offices all over the country from our clients, and they certainly tell a story.
Absolutely. And you can find them on archive22-store.com. All right, and that is our conversation with Chandler, and what an incredible story he has, and I'm glad we were able to share it with you. Sean only cried twice, so I think that's a win.
Well, the camera wasn't on me, so you don't even know, and you just kind of ruined it. I mean,
oh, shoot.
Maybe I didn't. It was Mackie with the teary eyes, the Field of Dreams conversation.
Field of Dreams, greatest game ever played, talking about the Evans Scholarship. I almost went 3 for 3 there, fellas.
Really great stuff from Chandler. I'm really proud of what he's done. I was there from the beginning to see it come to what it is now, and in people's houses, in people's offices, and just incredible what Archive 22 has become. And he's a great guy, a great storyteller, and an asset for the game of golf.
And I think it's definitely worth checking out everything he has on the site now. Certainly, if you're at Oakmont this week, you want to go and visit with Chandler in his tent. This is just the tip of the iceberg for what's available on the website, and he's always coming up with new pieces. So I'd certainly check it out. That is archive22-store.com. And for the human aspect of golf, it's definitely worth listening to the Inward 9, Chandler's podcast.
Yeah, lots of information on there from the standpoint of the courses that he's worked at, the people he's worked with, the relationships, and a ton of history on golf. There's a great episode on Bel Air and what that course has meant to the history of golf and the golf cart. There's Bob Ford. There's just tons of opportunities to educate yourself on the game of golf through his podcast, as well as his wonderful art that is kind of memorializing what's going on in the history of the game.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time on In the Harbor.